Dragon's blood sack mead. Yes, I said a sack mead. I also said dragon's blood. This is going to be one of the biggest projects I've started on this channel so far. And there's going to be a little bit of explanation to tell you exactly what a dragon's blood sack mead is. So for starters, let's go over the dragon's blood part. Really, all a dragon's blood mead or wine is a triple berry melomel, or a mead with 3 berries in it. It's really just that simple and not that exciting. But with a name like Dragon's Blood, you kind of want something a little more excited. So I'm bringing it to the next level and I'm making a sack mead. Now, a sack mead is a little bit different. It really pushes the boundaries of what a yeast can do alcohol-wise, and you're really making this grand mead, or this traditional mead, or I shouldn't say traditional mead, I should say a mead of traditions, or a mead of like festivals or parties or like celebrations. This is going to be around 18 to 20% ABV and a little sweet still, and be flavored with these berries. So it's a really powerful mead full of a lot of flavor, and it's really something. So to start with, how am I going to get my yeast to come up to almost 20% ABV? Well, I'm going to start with a yeast that I know has an 18% tolerance, a champagne yeast. This is going to be a kill factor yeast, which means it's going to take on everything in that brew and it's going to work its heart out. And we're going to have to do a little bit of our own work to get it there. The next part is how do we even know how much alcohol is going to be in the brew? So I often on this channel say you can use a conversion calculator, and while I stick to that, it's a very easy way to do it. So to figure out how much alcohol you're going to have in your brew, you kind of have to have a starting gravity in mind, and then a reasonable expectation of where it's going to finish. When I say reasonable, there are factors in some wines and meads that you can't control, such as unfermentable sugars. In this case, I know all the sugars I'm adding are fermentable, so I have to start at a gravity that will allow it. I also have to keep in mind that the berries themselves have a little bit of sugar. It's not a lot of sugar, but it's still some. So I want to make sure that the starting gravity is high enough to be considered a sack mead when it finishes, but give me just a little bit of leeway. In case there's some sugar in those berries, it could take those too. So what I'm going to do is take my hydrometer, and I really don't need it yet because I don't have a mustard or anything set up, but I'm going to look at the scale. You're going to notice that at the very top, you have a 1.000. Now that's the gravity of basic water. Now the more sugar in it, in this case sugar. There's other things that can change the specific gravity, but in this case sugar. I know that I normally get things started at around 1.100. In this case, I'm going to push it to somewhere in between 1.130 and 1.140. I'll put a scale somewhere around here so you can see what that looks like. Now, how did I get there? Well, I used a conversion. So basically, I take my starting gravity ideal, I minus it by my estimated finishing gravity, which is 1.000. I'll get to more on that later. Once you do your original gravity minus your finishing gravity, you're going to times that by 132. Now the actual conversion rate is 131.25, but after doing some testing, there's not really much of a difference, so I'm just going to do 132. It's simpler, it makes my life a little bit easier, and while I like math, brewing isn't a strict math. It is a science. There are so many factors, and knowing how each factor will affect the rest of the brew is critical in getting the perfect brew that you want. So with that said, now I know why I'm starting where I'm starting, and I know where I want to finish. So why don't we go from there? I am Phil. This is Phil with Facts, and today we are making our Dragon's Blood Sack Mead. So, to make your Dragon's Blood mead, you're going to need the following ingredients. Once you have that assembled, once it's assembled, I'm going to do something you have never seen me do before, something I don't normally do. However, I want to give this mead the best possible chance to hit that ABV mark I'm looking for and make this a sack mead. So I'm actually going to make a little bit of a non-traditional yeast starter. I'm starting with regular water that I've brought up to about 85 degrees. That's Fahrenheit. To it, I'm going to add about half a teaspoon of sugar. I'm going to add both yeast nutrients and yeast energizer. So essentially what I'm doing is, you know when you wake up for a big day and you have a nice breakfast, you grab your coffee or a Red Bull, and all of a sudden you feel like you could take on the world? I'm basically getting that combination to our yeast for this mead. Now, I'm also going to do a little bit of a staggered nutrient addition, but there'll be more on that when we get to it. Lastly, I'm going to add my yeast. Now, this is Lalvin EC 1118, which is a very popular champagne yeast. It's also known as a kill factor yeast, which means it'll take on anything else in this brew. So I'm not too worried about any microbes or stuff that might be in it. With that said, everything that's going to touch my brew today has been sanitized. I use Star San. I recommend you do the same. Now make sure you get every little bit you can. You don't want to waste any. Now we're going to give that a nice stir. Make sure everything is mixed up. Now, I'm using warmer water. I'm not using hot water. Anything over 110 degrees and you might just kill your yeast. And then it will never really take off. So, we don't want to do that. Get everything off the sides the best you can. Now, that's going to probably sit there for about the next 20 minutes, which will just start to wake the yeast up, get them acclimated to some sugar, get them working on some of that nutrient. And this way I'm adding a live or a live-ish colony to my brew so they can get right to work. This way it will start up a lot quicker and a lot cleaner. Now, for the actual brew, I'm going to use one of my wide mouth fermenters. These are great. These are the big mouth bubblers. I get mine from Northern Brewer, but I've seen other wide mouth that are also really cool looking. Really, I just want something that will allow me to get to that fruit when it's in here. Because there is going to be a fruit cap. I might need to punch it down. If you have this tiny little, I don't have one in my reach, but if you use a regular carboy that looks like a jug, you won't be able to really get to that fruit while it's fermenting. And bad things could happen. There's a lot of fruit going in here. I have 3 pounds of mixed berries I want to put in here. But first, I want to put in my honey. Now, as I said, I have a target gravity in mind. However, not all honey, in my experience, gives you the same gravity every time. So, usually I add 3 pounds, and that brings me somewhere between 14 and 16% ABV at the end. However, I can't shoot this one too high. If I overdo the numbers, if that gravity is too high at the start, this is not going to work. It's just not. And with that much honey, it's going to stall out at a very sweet level that I might not be able to drink, which means I'm wasting a lot of money, time, and energy in making this. So I'm going to underscore it at the beginning, and I'm only going to add 3 pounds of honey for now, and then I'm going to add a little bit of honey until I get the gravity I want. And we can get every drop we can. I just added a little bit of water and shook it around. I mean, you want every drop, right? You paid for the honey. You want to get it in your brew. Anything in the container, you're just throwing out, and that's wasteful. Next thing I'm going to do is add the berries. Now, I defrosted these overnight, so they're nice and soft. What you don't, I mean, you can just add them fully frozen from the package, but I'm going to start this brew off a little on the warmer side, and you would just be adding a bunch of ice to that. Try to get every drop you can. There you go. Maybe try to keep some towels around because that can get sticky real quick. Alright, so now what we're going to do is add a little bit of water. Now, I've heated this water already to, again, around 80 degrees. And I'm probably going to put it right up to about where the neck starts. I gotta say, for a container that just has a little bit of hot water, honey, and berries in it, it smells really good. So normally, I start until I think it's good. Today, I'm going to start until I know for a fact there's no honey left on the bottom. I want everything in suspension, or in the liquid, I should say. Because the gravity I start with, my original gravity today, is more crucial, if anything. Alright, I think we're good at that point. So now, I'm going to take my first of possibly many readings today. And I kind of want to know where the gravity's at the moment. And that'll kind of tell me how much more honey I need. Alright, so we're currently at a 1.120. Which is good. It's a good place to be. So next, I'm going to add this right back in. Also, I should say that gravity is kind of what I expected. But now that means I could add more honey and bring the gravity up a little bit more. I also could add a little bit more water to it because the gravity isn't that off. So I have a little bit more room for more product. So let me do that first. And now let me get some honey. So I'm gonna add about another ½ pound, maybe even closer to a pound, because it can take it at this point. And again, we want to mix that up completely. All right, let's take our next set of readings. All right, so we're at a 1.135. Perfect. That's right in the ballpark of where we want to be to start this. That's going to get us to about 18%, easy enough. Now I can add a little bit more, but these tolerance is 18. We can push that if we want by step feeding it once it goes dry. However, why don't we let it get started and tell us if it's going to go there? If we see it slow down drastically or stall early, we at least have some control over that. There's other ways we can bring the alcohol tolerance up. So I'm happy with that as a starting gravity. Alright, next I'm going to add a little bit of dried orange peel. Now, I get that in bulk from an Asian market, and it is fantastic. If you don't have access to dried orange peel, just use an orange peel. It is fun. I just happen to like the way this adds a more aged citrus flavor to my brew. However, you want some orange, however you want some orange peel in this. It's going to really elevate it. It's going to elevate it, and it's going to make it a nicer flavor profile at the end. So don't skip that part. Now my yeast is nice and frothy. I'm going to give it one more good stir, and I'm going to pitch it right in. Now, you can say that that's adding a little bit more water, and you're right, but at that little bit of volume, it's not changing the gravity by much. And we're also not accounting in our starting gravity that the little bit of sugar that's in the fruit won't leach out right now. It'll leach out over time. So it's perfectly acceptable. Only thing to really do now is put my lid on. Make sure it's tight. These tend to be a little loose fitting. So once you get it tight, that'll make all the difference in the world. If it's too loose, it's not going to hurt the brew, but it just might not give the airlock correct pressure, so you might not know it started after it started. Although all the signs of fermentation should be visible on the sides. I'm just going to clean up real quick and I'll be right back. So at this point, fermentation should kick off within the next few hours. It's already showing positive pressure, so I wouldn't be surprised if it takes off sooner rather than later. In my experience, if you start off with a slightly warmer liquid, and again, warm, I'm talking about a little bit hotter than room temperature, at around 80 degrees, I've just noticed that it makes the yeast wake up quicker, they get more active sooner, and they take off. Now, I live in New York and it's December, so it is cold. I keep my apartment at a reasonable temperature, but it's no longer those summer months where it might have more exposure to heat. Getting it started quicker is a benefit to the brew. Then, once they get going, the yeast actually create a little bit of their own heat. It's really kind of cool to feel a fermenter that's actively going and then touch a fermenter that's already in secondary and just feel the temperature difference. It's mild, but you can notice it. Now, I said earlier, this is going to be a staggered nutrient addition. I used Fermex for the nutrient of choice today, and I needed about a tablespoon per gallon, which I used 1 tablespoon. Now I'm going to stagger it, so I'm going to give it about a full day, a full 24 hours after it starts fermenting. I'm going to add my next addition. Then I'm going to give it another 2 to 3 days, and I'm going to give it a final addition. This little bit of step feeding of nutrients is going to keep the yeast colony going during fermentation and help it reach that higher alcohol tolerance. I'm also probably going to punch down that fruit cap about once a day for the first week, and I'll show you guys how that looks too as I'm doing it. And the whole idea behind there is to keep the fruit moist. Now, during an active fermentation, there's so much CO2 inside the fermenter that there's a really good chance that no mold will grow inside. However, with this much fruit and this much honey in the fermenter, I want to make sure that nothing can spoil my brew. So it's been about 24 hours since I started my Dragon's Blood Sack Mead. And you can see in the airlock, it's bubbling away slowly. It has a nice layer of what we call croissant line, but it's just a layer of foam. That means fermentation has started. It's all really good. And now we know we have a healthy fermentation, at least at the beginning. So we want to take the cap off real quick. And we're going to add 2 things today. One is pectic enzyme. I should have added this the first day. However, I forgot because I'm just human. And it's not really going to hurt it to add it now. And we're just going to sprinkle about 1 teaspoon on top. And then I'm going to add my first installment of yeast nutrients. This is just the Fermex again. And again, sprinkled right on top. And this is going to give it everything it needs to keep that healthy fermentation going. Now, you could just front load it and add all the nutrient you're going to add at the beginning. There are people who swear by that. That's normally what I do. However, because of the amount of honey in here and the request we're asking the yeast to do, I'm trying to give it a little bit more nutrients as they go. Either way would probably work. This is just, in my opinion, a better way to do this, or a better practice to do this if you are trying to get those higher ABV meads. So now we want to basically just push the fruit cap down. This spoon has been sanitized. In fact, this is a pitcher of sanitization liquid. It's Star San diluted down properly with water. If you're not doing a huge brew day, you don't have to have a giant bucket full of it. If you just need a couple of bowls and spoons and stuff, then just make a smaller batch. If you really just want to use the spoon that day, you can put a little bit of Star San and water solution into a squirt bottle and just, like spray it down. And that's good enough. So we're going to just push down, push down. You don't really want to stir it. The powders you added, the nutrient and the enzyme, will get dispersed as needed anyway. And this is just to make sure the berries stay moist, nothing dries out, and nothing funky grows on it. That's really the only purpose of this. And again, I'm going to do this probably once a day, the pushing down part, not the nutrient part. Probably going to push the berries down about once a day for the first week of fermentation. At that point, I'll probably be taking readings and all that stuff, so it's not as critical. This is when I want to make sure it gets done. And if you miss a day, if you can't do it, let's say you have to skip Tuesday, but you can do it Wednesday, that's fine. If you only do it once every 3 days, that's fine. It will probably be okay if you never open the top to the fermenter during primary fermentation. There's enough CO2 and everything in there that it should be good. These are precautions we're taking. They're not absolutely critical, but they help. And you know what? It's better to be safe than sorry sometimes. I'll give this another few days, and then I'll add the yeast nutrient again, probably another teaspoon or so, just to make sure it finishes out clean. At which point we then I'm then just going to let fermentation finish out. That should be enough nutrient at that point to get it through primer. After the third addition of nutrient, we're going to let that sit for another 5 days or so, and then we'll take our next reading. That's probably the next video you'll see, and we'll be able to tell, did it ferment all the way through? My prediction is yes, it's absolutely going to ferment all the way through, and then we'll have some choices to make. But more on that on the next vid. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you want to see the follow-ups to this video. This is, again, a Dragon's Blood sack mead. It is going to be an incredible mead when done. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about this brew or any other brew, please leave them below. I'm happy to answer anything. But guys, until next time, I'm Phil. This is Phil with Facts, and cheers. And I'm super happy to see it right now. So now what we're going to do is take the cap off. And it definitely smells like the first day of fermentation. And I'm going to add 2 things today. Now, as I said previously, we're going to add another bit, about half a teaspoon or so, of our Fermex, or any yeast nutrient you're using at this point. And you're just going to sprinkle it on top. The other thing I'm going to add, that I should have added yesterday, and you should add during the first day of fermentation, however, you could add it afterwards too. It will do relatively the same job. It's a little bit of pectic enzyme. There's a lot of pectin in these berries,